Hey there. So in this video, I want to talk to you about all of the evidence we have that supports evolution by natural selection. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and divided this into several categories. So I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about in this video, and then we'll get deeper into each one. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the fossil record. How do we know evolution occurred? Because we have all of these fossils showing that it actually occurred. The second thing we're going to look at here is biogeography. It actually makes a difference where organisms evolve, their geographical location. And so we will be talking about how life is affected and how life evolves in different geographies. The third thing we'll look at in this video is comparing the different anatomical evolutionary pieces. And so when we look at small changes over time in anatomy, it actually shows evolution pretty well. Then we'll look at some comparative embryology, how things develop, let's say in a womb. And then we'll talk about perhaps the most overwhelming support for evolution, and that is molecular biology and biochemistry. When we compare the DNA, when we compare the protein structure, it's actually pretty clear how we can trace evolution. And then we'll talk for a brief moment about artificial selection. That is how we as humans have now interfered with evolution and natural selection, and we can artificially select, as farmers do, what plants to breed with each other or what dogs to breed. And then finally, our last piece of support that we're going to go over in this video is how we can use mathematical models and simulations to make trees that show evolutionary relationships. Okay, so we're going to start with the very first one, fossil record. And so what I've got here for you is a few ways that we can actually date fossils. So before we can really dive into what fossils show us about evolution, how can we even date these fossils? So there's several different ways. I've highlighted the top three. The first one is that we can use the age of the rocks where the fossil is found to date the fossil itself. So if we know certain rocks, if we found a fossil here, when we know the age of those rocks, then we can assume that those fossils, the fossil that is there, is probably a very similar age. One of the best ways we do it actually is through what we call carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 is an isotope of carbon, which means it has a different number of neutrons than carbon normally has, and that means it's sort of radioactive and shows decay. And so if you look down here in this example, I'm showing you sort of an easy overview, a brief overview, simple one, of how we can use an accelerator, magnets, to actually put out some streams and measure the amount of decay coming off of these isotopes. So once we find that out, we can actually measure, if we know the rate of decay, we can measure how old that particular fossil is. And then, of course, another way to date fossils is to look within a tree. So if we have a tree and we're like, okay, we know this organism was here as an ancestor, and then these here, we think this one took a dive this way, this one started going up this way, we can use these trees, a relationship, to actually show how old fossils are as well. All right, so why do you have a picture here of Herder in the Grand Canyon? Well, one, this was a great trip. I wanted to show it off a bit. Two, this is really one of the most overwhelming pieces of support we have for evolution. In that, if you look in a place like the Grand Canyon, where there's layers of sediment over time, and if you go down to the bottom and look and you find a fossil, and then maybe you go up to somewhere up here and you find a fossil, and then somewhere up here and find a fossil, it actually shows increasing evolution as we go. And as suspected, the ones at the bottom would sort of be the oldest, right? A little more evolved, a little newer. At the top, of course, we would find the newest fossils. And it's just amazing how when we do this and we look, it literally shows evolution over time, right? We can see what we think were our ancient species and go up a little more evolved, finally to the most modern species up at the top. And there's a famous quote by Richard Dawkins that says, if at any point we found some fossil out of order, right? If we found a really, really old one buried deep down in here, excuse me, a really, really more evolved, fancy one down here, that could throw off evolution. But we've never found that. We continually see over and over that these fossils are distributed in the sedimentary layers over time, and it really shows evolution occurring. And here I've just got a few interesting examples of some fossils. You should know fossils are actually very rare to find. We don't find a ton of them. It's really hard to get them. So when we do, it's a really big deal. One of the most famous fossils of all times, of course, is Archaeopteryx. This is on display in the Smithsonian. And this is a fossil that's a really cool one because it shows the evolutionary relationship between reptiles and birds, right? We know that modern day birds are descendants of reptiles, of dinosaurs. And this Archaeopteryx, you can actually sort of see some of the feathering, right, of this reptile bird. Imagine that thing flying at you. And then, of course, we also have fossils really like if you're a fossil hunter, a paleontologist, and you're looking for like a gold fossil, you really want to find one of these in amber because these are really preserved. Not only are the bones or the skeleton preserved, but also a lot of the proteins are often preserved here. So we can really extract some DNA and really get some good information from these. This happens to be one of these unicorn fly fossils that's really nicely preserved in amber. Then another fossil that you'll see a lot are these trilobites or trilobites that are found. These are sort of ancient creatures that we actually have quite a few fossils of them preserved. So how do we know evolution occurred? Because we have fossils of it occurring over time. Then the second piece of evidence I want to talk about is biogeography. So if you break down the word bio, life, geography, right, the specific areas on our globe where things occur. And so this is about how species are distributed. And let's first look at this example down here. So many years ago, when all our continents were part of this sort of big Pangea, you can see how they sort of fit together. Now, what does this mean for us in science today and in biology? Well, it's interesting that we find fossils in areas where we think the continents used to be together. So let's take, for example, this one here, Lystrosaurus. We find fossils of this. We have found fossils here in Africa, here in India, here in Antarctica. How in the world would we find fossils in these different locations today if at some point they weren't together? Look here at Mesosaurus. We found in the bottom of Africa fossils of this. We found in the bottom of South America as well. So this just shows us how we can use continental drift theory and how we can actually find these fossils and show that these organisms evolved in a similar location and then spread out a bit. And it's amazing today, kind of suspicious, that we find fossils here in Africa and here in South America where they seem to have once been very close or maybe even connected. Okay? The other piece of biogeography that we want to talk about is in living species today. And what we find is that species living or evolving in the same area are actually very closely related. Well, that makes sense. If an organism evolved here and its descendants evolved in this area, right, then these animals living in this particular part of the world are going to be closely related. And then conversely, just because an organism looks similar, if it evolved in a different region, we actually find that they're not related. And I've got a really good example of that here for you. So take, for example, our flying squirrel and the sugar glider. Now you look at these two organisms and you say, that's the same thing. They must be related. Actually, they're not related at all. The flying squirrel, a squirrel that literally flies through the air, evolved up here sort of in North America, up in this area here. The sugar glider is a placental, is a marsupial, and it evolved down here in areas of Australia. So you look at these and you're like, Herder, these are definitely related. But when we look at the DNA, we find they're not related at all when we start analyzing their DNA. Well, this makes sense. The sugar glider, a marsupial, is actually more closely related to like koalas and kangaroos, as this squirrel, which is a placental mammal up here, right? This is more related to the mammals that you see up here in North America. And you say, well, how does this show evolution? Well, it's something we call convergent evolution. Nature evolves similar solutions to similar problems. So this mammal down here in Australia, it probably had some adaptation that allowed it to fly through the air a little bit, or glide down, not fly as much as glide. That was an adaptation which helped it survive. The flying squirrel up here in North America had a similar adaptation, a similar solution to a similar problem. So we see biogeography showing us animals that evolve in similar areas are related. Animals that evolve in similar areas are related. These did not evolve in the same area, so they're actually not related. So then moving on to the third category. So we've looked at fossils, we've looked at biogeography. Now we want to look at comparative anatomy and how we can look at different anatomical structures and learn about evolution. Well, the first one I want to talk about is analogous structure. And when you think analogous, think analogy, think similar. So this goes along with what we were talking about convergent evolution. Nature has similar solutions to similar problems. So an analogous structure is a structure that's similar, but no evolutionary relationship. In other words, these things are not closely related. And let me give you two examples, or an example here showing two species. Think of dolphins, think of fish. Well, they kind of have some similarities, right? They've got these flippers, these fins, if you will, but they're actually not related. They have analogous structures or similar structures, but they came from different places. You may know that a dolphin is a mammal, right? More closely related to us than to the fish they swim alongside, right? Fish are aquatic vertebrates. Both of these things have adapted to life in the sea, but they're actually not related at all. So once again, we see nature with a similar problem coming up with a similar solution. So these analogous structures are similar structures, but they show no evolutionary relationship. And another example I want to point out to you are all the flyers, right? The flying animals. So here we've got an insect, we've got maybe a moth, butterfly here. We've got an owl, a bird, and we've got a bat. All right, so once again, we think, okay, these must be related, right? Because they fly. Well, it's actually not true. These do not share a common ancestor, right? No common ancestor. These are what we call analogous structures, flying, wings. The bat, right, if you think about, is a mammal more closely related to us. Class Mammalia. We see birds, things that are in class Aves. These are in different categories. And of course, insects that are very different from all of these. But we see similar solutions to similar problems. Those are analogous structures. The other type of structure that I'm going to talk about in a minute is what we call homologous structures. So homology, think homo, same. So these have a same or common ancestor. And here's some examples of some homologous structures. If you look at the forelimbs of human, cats, whales, and bats, they actually share a similar structure. Now you may say, wait a minute, these things aren't related. But they are, right? Humans, cats, whales, bats, all mammals. We all share a common ancestor. And if you look here, we've got similar structure, similar development, showing a common ancestor. So let's take a look here. We know our bone's the best. So if we look at the bones of some of the forelimbs, what we see here is you can see the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. You can see all of those there together. Well, okay, that's in humans. We know those pretty well. Look over at a dog. Wow, it's amazing how similar these are. We got humerus, your radius, you got your ulna, carpals, metacarpals. Bird, same thing. Look here, right? Whale. What? Whales? Mammals? Yeah, right? They have very similar structure, very similar homology. And this is because we all evolved from, at some point, a common ancestor. And when we say recent common ancestor, you understand that's all relative. Yeah, right? It's more recent. It's a long time ago, right? But it's more recent than, say, the ancestor that we share with an insect, for example. Okay, so still under this category of anatomy, we want to talk about vestigial organs. And these are organs that we see in modern animals that serve little or no function, right? So why would we have these things? Let's start with talking about the tailbone. Humans have a tailbone. If anything, it causes problems. We don't need it. It shows no function. Why do we have it? Well, it's actually a vestige or a vestigial organ left over from when we had a tail. And the weird thing is, you can look this up, is that some humans are sometimes randomly born with tails. There's some mutation that allows for a human to have a tail grown. You can look that up on Google. It's pretty interesting. So these, again, are organs that we have that have no function for us today, but they did at some point. Look over here at the Darwin tubercle. This is a vestigial part of the ear tip that a lot of people have that is left over from when we shared a common ancestor with monkeys or apes. And we have no need for this, but it's still there from when we had a common ancestor. One of the weirdest ones to me, and this one kind of freaks me out since I don't like snakes, is that some snakes and whales show remains of their leg bones from when they used to walk, right? So if you look at a modern day boa constrictor, you can touch it, not me, and you look underneath, they actually have these little vestigial hind legs. That's kind of freaky. But this is vestigial structures left over. They don't need these anymore. They slither, right? But they actually have some of these vestigial hind legs left. And then I promised you the one here about whales. Whales actually show remnants, right? If you look here at letter C, this is the undeveloped hind legs of a baleen whale. And so if you look at whale fossils, if you look at even some modern day whales, you can see some of these remnants of legs. Wait, why would a whale have little parts of a leg? Well, whales at some point we know used to be land animals. And then, of course, they moved back into the water later on. They are mammals, right? Just like us. Okay, so those are vestigial organs. Be really careful when you're trying to separate these three things, because what we've talked about is analogous, similar. We talked about homologous structures, same, similar, same, and then vestigial structures, which are leftovers from other organisms in our past. Okay? So it's really important for you to try to separate those in your mind. People often get them confused. All right, so then the next category. So we've talked about fossils. We've talked about biogeography. We've talked about similar anatomy. The next category is comparing embryos. And what's really interesting is that we can trace and see how embryological development, that's development as an embryo, is so closely related. If I were to show you a picture of a human embryo and a bird embryo, you would probably not be able to tell the difference. And this shows evolutionary similarity. We actually, all vertebrates, have a gill pouch at one stage in our development. We as humans don't have gills, but at some point during our development, in our embryology, in the womb of your mother, you had a little bit of a gill pouch. Now you don't need that now, of course, but it's sort of in our DNA still. And as we are growing, as we are developing embryologically, you can actually see these remnants and this similar development in these closely related species. Pretty interesting when you start to really look and see all of the shared specific characteristics that we show when we're developing. Okay, so then this one, I think, number 5, is our most overwhelming evidence. How do we know that evolution occurred? Because we can look at the DNA and we can see small little changes in the DNA over time that actually match up all our predictions about how we think evolution occurred. So this category is called molecular biology, and it's comparing DNA and protein. All right, so we've looked at this before, right? It's the universal genetic code. It's pretty amazing that everything in the world shares this code. Whether you are a bacteria, a plant, or a human, this code from your DNA to RNA, then coding for these amino acids to make your protein, is the same in all species. I wonder why. Maybe because we all evolved from a similar species. And so we compare DNA, we compare RNA, and we can see small little differences. One of the big topics right now is actually comparing mitochondrial DNA to show relationships, because this is something where we can focus on. We're like, all right, let's look at the mitochondrial DNA and compare it in different species. And that's how we can help to make some of these charts and show evolutionary relationships. The other way we can do it, instead of DNA, is to actually look at the protein. So 2 proteins that are pretty ubiquitous in many animals alive today is the cytochrome C protein and the hemoglobin protein, right? Cytochrome C, you may remember from respiration. Hemoglobin, you may remember from a discussion on gas exchange. These are both very important proteins. And we can actually trace small little mutations, small little changes over time in the cytochrome C protein and in the hemoglobin protein. And once we look and we compare them, we can see how similar other organisms are to each other by just comparing cytochrome C protein or hemoglobin. But then the best evidence, of course, comes when we take all of these together to get a big picture. We look at the DNA, we look at the proteins, we look at the anatomy. We can then start to get a clear picture of how evolution occurred. One of the most common questions I get a lot is, what's this whole deal about apes and chimpanzees, and did I come from an ape? Well, that's a little misleading. First of all, humans did not evolve directly from modern day chimpanzees. We actually share a common ancestor. So if you think, if here's our common ancestor, down here. We were just moving along, and at some point, there was some event. Chimpanzees started going this way, humans continued down this track. There was some forking, if you will, right? So, did I evolve from a modern day chimpanzee that you can see in a zoo? No, of course not. But we do share a common ancestor down here. Now, why are we different? How are we similar? What maybe caused us? Well, there's some ideas about our similarity and what may have been one of these major events that led to this sort of derivation. So, to explain this, let's remember a few things. Humans, we have 23 pair of chromosomes, or 46 total. Well, if you look at and this is modern day humans, modern day chimpanzees. If you look at modern day chimpanzees, you see that they have 48 or 24 pair. So yeah, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, they actually have more chromosomes than humans. Well, what could explain that? Well, some scientists had an idea, and they published this work back in 2005, that it was actually two chromosomes in one of our ancestor species that fused together to make one chromosome for us. So how did we go from 24 to 23? One way is to just lose one. We lost a chromosome. Well, another way is for two chromosomes, maybe two smaller ones, to come together and form one bigger chromosome. Well, we actually think this is what happened. And we have some strong evidence to support that. If you look and you remember back, do you remember what is at the end of every chromosome? Well, it happens to be something called telomeres, and we still see these today. They're these non-coding sequences. Well, so if two chromosomes a long time ago fused together, what would we see today? Well, we'd see in the center of one of our chromosomes a lot of telomeres, or a telomere sequence. And believe it or not, when we started looking, there is one. Chromosome number 2, as you can see here, emerged from a head-to-head fusion of two other chromosomes. So our chromosome number 2, which is actually a pretty big one, is one of the points whereby which some ancestor that we share with chimpanzees, those chromosomes fuse together. So we do have quite a bit of similarities today with apes, but we think some of this started, what's maybe started a different lineage or a different fork, if you will, was some of this fusion that occurred with these two chromosomes going into one. All right, so we just got two more to wrap up. So the sixth piece of evidence for natural selection and evolution is that we can actually make it happen today. So we can force selection. So instead of natural selection, which nature does, we can do it artificially. And you see this here with what we've done to these poor, majestic creatures, right? You look at this wolf, this majestic hunter, if you will, and then we have, over time, taken this animal, bred it, right? Created different varieties, and we get these little foo-foo things that we have today that you carry around in your purse. And that is because we artificially select. You might say, well, how did all these evolve? Well, they actually are a result of us selecting different members of the wolf species down into, over the years, these small little things here, right? And we do the same thing over here with plants. All these things that you maybe eat, I don't eat because I don't like broccoli, cauliflower, gross. They actually are all from the wild mustard, the brassica plant. Over time, farmers, people, humans, selected different parts of this plant to grow. So the same thing here. If you're looking at a dog and you pick the runts of the litter, and then you mated the runts, and then you picked the runts of that litter and mated the runts, and you picked those with interesting, oh, this one had a lot of foo-foo hair, and mated those together, you could eventually get to these dogs over generations. Well, we did the same thing here, right? Oh, this one has a big flower. Let's mate it with another one that has a big flower. And over time, you keep mating those, you get cauliflower, right? If you look at the buds and the stems, some of these had this little enlarged bud or stem. Over time, you select for those things and you get modern day broccoli. So these are the result of us artificially selecting over time the traits that we wanted to pass to the next generation. Okay, and then finally, how do we know evolution occurred? Because we build models of it, we use math, and we can actually predict our ancestors based on these models. So we got a few here I want to show you, right? We got a typical cladogram or tree. This shows certain species and then a common ancestor, and then how far we go back and how we're related. We can see these cladograms as here. Well, I have a whole podcast on cladograms and phylogenetic trees that you'll watch later, or you can watch later if you want more information. Same thing here, we can show it here. This is a really cool image of vertebrate evolution. You can see our common ancestor way back here in the Paleozoicum era, and how that evolved over time into all these different species. And okay, these modern day, we're up here somewhere, right? We'd be a little over here. Came and derived off of here, which was also a common ancestor of the birds and the reptiles. And then you can trace it down. So these are really cool family trees, if you will, that show. These are one of my favorites, though, and we'll look at this in a little more detail. This actually happens to be a family tree of bacteria, and these are all different bacterial species. You can see a common ancient bacteria here that evolved over some time, and then it split, and some started evolving this way, some started evolving this way. It's just a different way of sort of showing a family tree. Okay, so those are your 7 areas, your 7 major supporting characteristics to show and support evolution and natural selection. That shows all of those things that we talked about. So it's pretty overwhelming evidence at this point to support evolution. So hopefully you found some ways to understand all this evidence for evolution over time, and this will help you on your journey to scientific discovery.